Hi, this is Neil Buchanan with Rock Our World. I've had this two subjects on my mind for quite some time, but talking to a friend last night or yesterday kind of pulled it all together. I don't think I'd realized these two subjects were connected so closely, and they're two moral dilemmas that we're faced with. And I think in a lot of ways they're being brought to the forefront this very spring. One of them we could call a spiritual dilemma, moral dilemma, and the other one a physical moral dilemma. And the second, the physical one, relates all the way back, and I'm going to pick 30 years. It's actually a more specific number, but it's about 30 years ago that a product called, well, it has a brand name, Roundup, but its chemical name is Glyphosate. And it was the newest wonder chemical or wonder herbicide in that it kills everything. And I had mentioned this very briefly in a couple of places in former episodes, but my career for most of my life was a farmer. I grew up on a farm. I became a farmer, and I farmed most of my life, 32 years. And my wife and I chose to be organic farmers, and that was way back before anybody knew what that was. We didn't know what it was either. We just made that decision, or actually mostly me, but my wife was always supportive until many years later when the money got too thin for too long, and she became discouraged. And I eventually did, to the point I also quit farming, but I own the land and rent it out. Our land goes back 4 generations, right to the first guys that came to Saskatchewan up here in Canada. And so I'm farming a piece of property that's been in the family for 4 generations. That's not completely accurate, but that's close enough for a brief explanation. Anyway, to me, that choice 30 years ago, I had just had my first encounter with God, and I was, you know how you are when you're young, you're idealistic, you tend to be, and that you know everything. So there I was. I knew everything, and I was going to farm without chemicals, because in my idealistic thinking, if anything that goes and kills stuff, if you got a choice between thinking that it's good or it's bad, I made what I thought was the logical choice, that it's bad. And then skipping forward in this story, when this wonder chemical came out, a Roundup, chemical named glyphosate, that kills everything. It doesn't just target different types of weeds so that it leaves the one you're trying to grow alone. This one targets everything. So and then the chemical company in question, and they're all guilty, but there's one in particular that's above all the rest. They exploited this chemical, or this toxic substance, and they manipulated genetics in plants, and they created specific plants that were immune to this Roundup that kills everything. And then they said that's good too. Well, it turns out all those plants, which is virtually everything that's grown in North America, are devoid of their minerals. That's the net effect of this genetic manipulation. So in other words, we're eating foodless food. And then on top of that, all the Roundup or glyphosate residues are causing cancer and all kinds of things. So backing up 30 years, this company and all the other ones knew it was carcinogenic. But you know what they told the farmers? Oh, this stuff's safe. You can drink it. I have a friend who's quite old now. He's still alive, but he, as a boy, he remembers the first salesman that came in with 2,4-D. Now that was way back in the 50s, the first wonder chemical, the wonder drug of farming. He was a little boy. I wasn't even born yet. He remembers the salesman coming into the house and drinking 2,4-D in front of his dad, saying that this is obviously very safe. And then my friend Art Newells, he kind of smiles and he says, you know what? All those guys are dead. Well, anybody that drank Roundup, they're all dead. And anyway, it came out in the wash this past winter, and thanks to the internet, it's hard to hide your dirt now that we got the internet. They knew, the guilty companies knew about this 30 years ago. Didn't say a word. In fact, they said it's perfectly safe. And then they went ahead and developed all these Roundup ready crops and kept on insisting this is 100%. No, it never was 100%. Now we have a whole continent addicted to using glyphosate for everything in their farming, growing all their crops, and all those crops are laced with Roundup. And it would seem that it was a bit of a heads up when Europe was kind of the first one, started refusing to use it, and then started refusing to buy grain that has any residue on it. They knew long ago, but we just kept going forward. And I think in the end, people choose to be ignorant. They don't. They're not just ignorant. They make that choice. And so anyway, this spring, seeding's started, and it's soon to start up here in Canada. But I'm sure it's well underway somewhere in the States as you go south. And all those farmers are faced with a moral dilemma. Are they going to just keep right on going out there and lace in all our food with glyphosate? Or are they going to, answer to their conscience? So that's the physical moral dilemma that everybody in North America is going to be faced with this spring. And the second one, which is greater but has less airtime, and I've covered this subject too, about 30 years ago, it was revealed that the New Testament, what Christians call the New Testament, you've heard me calling it the inspired commentary, and I'll talk more about this. I would just give an opinion of where all the various books should be placed, because God only gave us three categories: the Torah, the first 5 books, that is, of our Bible, and then we call it a Bible, but God doesn't. He calls it the Torah. And then the second section of books is the prophets, and then the last one, the writings. And my opinion would be that eventually, all books that are written by the Lord will be put into one of these 3 categories. For instance, I would put the Gospels and the Book of Acts into the category of the writings. And I feel there's one missing Gospel. It's called the Book of Acts of Nicodemus, or alternately the Pontius Pilate, the Book of Pontius Pilate, Acts of Nicodemus. No, Nicodemus or the Acts of Pontius Pilate. Anyway, and then I've talked about the 3 books missing in our from way back. They got booted out of the record of God's Word because Satan, who's in charge of all these things, doesn't want people knowing anything about demons and their origins and how God dealt with them up to the point that Jesus came along, Yeshua, and then he dealt with them with great authority and lots. He dealt lots with them, but then we stopped talking about them after Jesus, and here we are today, not talking much about demons. Anyway, these books are going to be brought back. These things are going to be straightened out. And the second, more important spiritual moral dilemma that's been kept under wraps for 30 years again, I'm just picking 30 for a round figure, that what the Christians have called the New Testament was written not in Greek, but it was written in Aramaic. And that was a lie from the start. Like, they lied it was Greek, and they used the opportunity to twist everything they could twist. So in other words, all the Greek translations, that is, there's about 300 of them, are all full of lies. And they did everything in their power to present the idea that Jesus got rid of the Torah. And that's ridiculous. And I've given you quite a number of strategies to look at that. In fact, if you get rid of the Torah, then you also get rid of the New Covenant, and you get rid of sin. And in fact, that is Christianity's biggest struggle. They say one thing on one hand, and then they struggle with trying to tell us what sin is and trying to tell us what the New Covenant is. And they have not accomplished either one. They don't know what sin is, and they don't know what the New Covenant is. And I've covered those subjects quite a bit. But this moral dilemma is coming out in the wash. And the same thing is the internet. You can't put a lid on the internet. It was actually created for evil, but the Lord has used it for good. And of course, there's lots of evil people. Probably the worst one would be pornography. So anybody out there want to let their ear be talked into, get rid of all pornography in your life and avoid it like the plague. It'll destroy your marriage, your family, your life. It'll destroy everything. So that moral dilemma, spiritual moral dilemma, that we need a New Testament. I'll call it the inspired commentary. We're on that from my wife. It needs a translation done ASAP, but in the meantime, there's one done by Ross, the Ain't American English New Testament. Very poor in my opinion, based on a 1921 and laced full of Hebrew words, which would be great if we were Hebrew, but we're not. We're English, so a word again to all the Messianics: get rid of that glitch in your religion. Just use English words. If you're in England, if you're in English-speaking countries, if you're in Germany, use German words, and so on. Italian would be Italian words. This is fairly simple strategy, to make the truth be known in the common language. So there we are. Every believer, and that includes the Jewish people. And I would also encourage people along the lines of spread this word. Even this particular episode that I'm putting together. Tell your friends about it. To listen to these two moral dilemmas. Spread it. I want it spread all over the English world, and I want it spread all over, like the dilemma that farmers are facing and the dilemma that believers are facing, that we have to get these two lies fully exposed. And it's time to step up to our moral challenges and do something about it. The leaders in the church need to face this and start stepping up to the plate and teaching the things of the Lord. And the farmers need to step up to the plate and learn alternate ways than radically body-changing chemicals, i.e. causing cancer and all kinds of strange diseases that we've never seen before, because our food is foodless and it's laced with glyphosate and other radical chemical compounds. There's lots of now we have a high-tech world. We are learning all kinds of things for organic farming. I'd love to get back into it. We have so many tools now. I spent 30 years learning every way how not to farm, and but there's a lot of knowledge I have in those years. So I just thought I would add two last things before I sign off. Anyone that has a question that they are itching to get answered, not saying I could answer it, and first ask the Lord and practice that, hearing His voice and so on. But I'll give you a box number, box 102, Francis, Sask, Saskatchewan, and it'll get there the slow way. And but do that as a last resort. I don't want the post office flooded with mail and wasted my time. So that's a last resort. And also you can find our farm right from outer space on Google World, or the satellite pictures. If you go to Regina, the capital of Saskatchewan, right in the southern part of the big rectangular province that's as big as Texas, and you go to the south part of it, you'll see Regina kind of in the middle of the south edge of it, and then you go southeast about 40 miles down the 33 highway, and you'll find Francis, and then you go north 2 miles and you'll see our farm. 8 beautiful rows of trees running 1.5 miles. My wife and I and my 4 children planted those in 1989, and they have lots of stories to tell my 4 kids of weeding those trees. So I'll sign off here, and please spread the word about the moral dilemmas that everybody in the world is facing this very spring. Signing off, Neil Buchanan with Rock Our World. That's from Daniel 2.